This is the brand new Losi 22s sprint car, and this little freak of nature is actually a faithful scale reproduction of a 950 horsepower fire-breathing race car. The full-size version of these cars are the fastest things to go around a dirt oval racetrack, and today we're gonna take this thing to a dirt oval to see if it just looks good or if it's a real racer. To get a better look at this thing, we need to pull this giant top wing off, and that's actually really easy on this car. All we have to do is pull this hidden latch back here, and the whole thing lifts right off. Pulling that wing off actually takes about half the car with it, and you can see we've got a lot of scale detail here. These are the exhaust headers for where the V8 engine would normally go. We've got those on both sides, as well as some scale crash structure. This scale detail on the outside that kind of looks like a sway bar actually reproduces the steering linkage on the full-size sprint cars. Inside, we've got a really detailed driver figure, as well as this protective seat with all the head and neck restraint systems. And then around back, you can start to see all the detail that went into making this car. This thing's absolutely amazing. We've got reinforcement for the upper part of the wing, as well as matching reinforcement for the lower part. All of the wing and body panels are thick molded plastic. This is not your usual Lexan. This plastic is definitely thick and feels like it's going to be really durable. Underneath that, things start looking a little bit more like a regular RC car, though there are a lot of scale details down here as well. We've got a really nice chrome bumper, more hard plastic body shell, a big front wing to match that top wing, and a bumper in the front. It's really only when you flip this car over that it starts to look like a standard 1/10 scale RC car, though. This car goes under the 22s moniker, but under the hood, things look really different from most 22s I've seen before, and it looks like a lot of this stuff will be unique to this particular car. So what the heck is a sprint car, and why does this thing look so weird? Way back in the 1920s, people started driving Ford Model T cars around horse tracks, and believe it or not, this is the natural evolution from that. As you can see here, we have licensed Hoosier sprint car wheels and tires. These things look really nice. They have a medium soft compound and some surprisingly firm foams in them. I'm not gonna lie, I don't know a ton about RC sprint cars, so maybe this is completely normal, but they feel pretty stiff to me. Moving on from the Model T era in the 1920s, in the 30s and 40s, purpose-built sprint cars started to emerge, and these were getting raced on fairgrounds and on small dirt tracks around the country. As you can see, these rear tires are a matching set of Hoosier sprint car tires, and the foams on them are also quite stiff. Between then and what you see here on the bench, sprint cars have evolved a lot, including a lot of safety updates, as well as a ton of power, performance, and most notably aerodynamic updates. Basically, everything you see on this car that isn't designed to go fast or handle well is designed for aerodynamics. That includes these wheel covers that are only on one side of the car. As I'm sure you noticed, a lot of the aerodynamic features on this car are asymmetrical, and that's because this thing races on an oval and really only ever turns left. These right side wheel covers are designed to increase aerodynamic efficiency and prevent dirt from getting slung everywhere, while on the left side they don't have wheel covers because this increases cooling capability for things like the brakes. The fact that the cars only turn left also explains why this wing looks very, very strange, and it is asymmetrical. This is done to present as much vertical area to the side air as possible. If these two vertical parts were in alignment with each other, you'd really only have the surface area of one side, as the other side wouldn't be in the air. And then, believe it or not, the horizontal part of this wing can actually provide between 1,000 and 2,500 pounds of downforce to the car. As I'm sure you can imagine, with an engine making 1,000 horsepower and running on dirt, the full-size sprint cars need all the help they can get to maintain control. Tires on this side are identical to the other side. The only difference is the 3 little holes for the hubcaps. Even if you wanted to, you couldn't put hubcaps on the other side, of course. To keep it scale, you really do just want them on one side. Just like the full-size sprint car, this Losi sprint car is rear-wheel drive, but unlike the 950 horsepower of a full-size car, this thing's only got a 2S 45 amp ESC. Now that's not because Losi doesn't want you to go fast, that's because generally speaking, 2S is what these cars are raced on, and that's really what this car is made for. Of course, you know we're going to be bashing it. As you can see here, we've got 2 rubber straps. These are to hold the battery in, and these actually look really nice. It might be hard to see in here, but there's actually steel pins holding them in place. This seems like a much nicer system than a lot of the rubber straps I've seen, and it's also nice to see they have 3 different tabs on them. That should make putting the battery in and taking it out a lot easier than when you just have one little tab that's kind of hard to grab. Back here, you can see we have a Spectrum Firma 3300 kV motor. It does look like this motor and this ESC are brand new part numbers. The ESC is definitely potted, so this should be water resistant at least. And of course, most brushless motors are technically water resistant. What I don't think is water resistant is this SR215 receiver. And as you can see, it's not in a receiver box, so I suspect this whole car isn't going to be water resistant. Though we do see a little water resistant sticker on the servo, which we'll be looking into more in just a minute. Since full-size sprint cars do sometimes run without these wings, apparently Losi has made this thing look really really, really nice without them as well. We will be pulling these off after we run it with them on. And I'm curious to see how this thing looks with them off because the full-size sprint cars look really neat bare without the wings. I suspect this will look really cool as well. In the front and rear of the car, we do have metal-bodied threaded shocks. These shocks do have plastic caps on them, and it looks like the shocks in the rear of mine were actually weeping a little bit. I think it was coming from this shock bleeder, so these are emulsion style shocks. Let's see if that bleeder is loose at all, and yeah, this bleeder definitely could have been tighter. That's probably why it was leaking. We'll keep an eye on this as we bash it though. As you can see, we've got plastic caps here, plastic threaded collars for the springs, plastic bottom caps, plastic spring perches, and plastic bottom eyes. The shocks themselves feel very smooth, typical Losi smoothness. Shock shafts are nice and thick. And then pulling this shock cap off, we can see that they've decided to put the O-ring here at the bottom. Every manufacturer seems to be doing something different with their emulsion style shocks. And I've actually found that some of them don't really seal up very well. I think having this O-ring on the bottom is a good idea because it's not getting squished between the threads and the cap on the top, but time will tell whether or not this decides to leak on us. And of course, since this is an emulsion style shock, you can see there is no shock bladder in here. Full-size sprint cars are set up very differently on the left and the right because they only ever turn left. I was really curious to see if Losi had done the same thing on this car, and I'm not sure if you can see it or not, but it looks like the shock tower is actually different on the right than it is on the left. So either they did set it up to turn left or this body is offset. Let's get this body off and take a closer look at that. This part of the body is only held on by 2 screws, making this area extremely serviceable, which is nice to see because on a lot of these scale cars, usability tends to take a backseat to looks. I think they might have struck a good balance here. And as you can see here, this piece is also thick black plastic, not Lexan. I don't know if this is ABS or nylon, but it should be very durable. Of course, we're definitely going to be putting that to the test. With the body off, we can see that the shock tower is actually symmetrical. It's the body itself that's offset, and that's faithful to the full-size cars. They're actually offset to the left for weight and aerodynamic purposes. You can see just how far offset this body mount is. That's a really nice touch. Pulling the rear end off this chassis, which I hadn't really noticed before, but is also offset to the left, things start to look a little bit more normal, but then they immediately start looking a lot more weird. As you can see here, the D-block is actually offset, and it really looks to me like one side of the suspension has more toe in than the other side does, which means this thing really might be set up to turn left. The C and D blocks are plastic, but the hinge pins do look pretty stout. I am curious to see how durable this thing is because the entire vehicle is actually pretty heavy. Of course, we're going to find that out here in just a few minutes. In the rear, we do have full-on CVDs. These are going into sealed bearings, and all this stuff does look very high quality. With all of that weirdness finally removed, we're left with what appears to be a fairly generic 2-wheel drive powertrain. We can get a closer look at that new Spectrum motor, and it does feel as though there is a differential back here. Let's pull it apart and see what the slipper looks like. Under this cover, we have a basic slipper clutch setup. This is a sintered steel pinion gear and a plastic spur gear. For something like this, I think that'll be just fine. Though, of course, a plastic spur gear is more likely to strip out, but it's also going to be quieter. Losi is offering a ton of upgrades for this platform, including a bunch of carbon fiber parts, a bunch of aluminum parts, and some different tuning options for your springs, as well as different color bumpers and wings, and a few other bits and pieces. I didn't see any transmission upgrades offered, but given that we're looking at all steel gears in here, that's probably not going to be necessary. This differential also looks fairly stout. We've got some nice grease on the outside, which doesn't look like it was dug out of the bottom of an industrial machine in China. That's really nice to see. Let's take a look at the inside of this differential. So far, I'm actually really impressed with the build quality of this car. I definitely am curious to see how it handles normal bashing and driving. Obviously, they do have this set up for racing with all that left bias, but I suspect they also will have set it up for bashing, given that a lot of people that buy these probably aren't going to race them. Of course, I have zero experience with sprint car racing, so I might just be wrong about that. Let me know down in the comments if you would race or bash this car. And while you're down there, if you enjoy these deep dive teardowns, make sure you get subscribed because we do these all the time. Pulling this all steel differential housing apart, we can see we do have a sealed diff. It is nicely filled with differential fluid, and we've got all steel gears inside. Overall, this looks really, really good. Let me get all this thrown back together. We've got just a few more things to look at before we take this thing out for a blast. Just like with the rear end and the chassis, the front end is also offset, but I think that only extends to the body, not to the actual suspension itself. Unlike the asymmetric nature of the rear end, the front end looks pretty much normal, and I don't really see anything out of the ordinary in the suspension or the steering system. You can see we do have a built-in servo saver on the servo horn, and the Spectrum 684 servo also looks fairly normal, though I've never seen inside one of these, so let's at least pop the bottom cover off and see if it actually is waterproof. I've messed with a lot of RC cars over the years, and I would say this is probably the most unique one I've ever seen. I don't think I've ever seen one that was set up to be asymmetric like this. It definitely is interesting. As you can see here, we don't have any O-rings on the screws, and popping the bottom cover off reveals that the entire insides came out with it, which is not what I was expecting, and definitely not normal for a servo. There is no O-ring here, but the entire bottom board is potted. This is a really unusual design. According to the pictures, this is just a standard brass metal geared servo, so we're not going to take a look at the gears, as there's probably nothing too exciting to see in there. Though I do find it really interesting how many different designs Spectrum has for their servos. It's definitely obvious they get them from quite a few different manufacturers, and it makes me wonder just how many different servo manufacturers there are out there. I know AGFRC makes a lot of aftermarket servos, Savox makes their own servos, Pro Modeler makes their own, but then there's probably just a few OEMs that make all of the rest of them, and this is probably made by one of those OEMs. Whether or not it's going to be appropriate for this car, we're going to find out in just a minute. I do want to remind you though that this receiver isn't waterproof, so even though the motor, ESC, and servo are, the entire car isn't. Looking in the manual, I don't see any place where it talks about it being waterproof or not waterproof. If you don't see specific waterproof claims, you can just assume that the car isn't waterproof. In this manual, we can also see adjustment for the ESC. There's quite a few different options in here, including being able to run the BEC on 7.4 volts, which it seems to be set at by default. This is something we're seeing more and more in the industry, and it's a really nice thing to see. To go along with that, we're also getting the SLT2 transmitter. This transmitter is just fine, and I suspect most people that'll be racing this car will probably use their own transmitter anyway, so I don't really have a problem with the included cheap transmitter. If you get the model that includes a battery, you'll get this 4000 milliamp hour 2S smart battery. One thing to keep in mind with these batteries is that because there is no balance connector, you do have to use the smart Spectrum chargers to charge them, which is why we get this included S120 charger. This is a fairly decent little USB-C powered LiPo charger. It does have the ability to do 2 and 3S with balance connectors, and it'll charge up to 2 amps, assuming your power supply is capable of providing those same 2 amps. We also get a bag with some accessories that I think are for when you run this thing without the wings. We'll take a look at that in just a little bit. And then finally, we get a couple of tools, some extra battery mounting pieces, and what looks like an extra spring for the servo saver. I suspect this is to make the servo saver stiffer. That's actually a really nice option if you're running stronger servos. And an included extra they really didn't have to do that might save you money down the road. All right, guys, enough talking. I want to see what this thing can do. Let's go find out. First things first, let's see how fast this thing is. Ah, she's got a little bit of pep, did a wheelie there. All right, here we go. Full throttle. That's brisk. Give her one more little pass. Full throttle. That's pretty fun. Let's go one more time. All right, let's see what we got. It seems to handle pretty well on concrete, that's for sure. All right, 25 miles an hour. That seems pretty good for 2S. Let's go see how this thing runs on a track. All right, guys, it's designed for a dirt oval, so let's run it on a dirt oval. Now, I want to warn you, I have literally never done this before, so I'm going to be very, very bad at it, as I'm sure you're going to see pretty darn quickly here. But we can get a bit of an idea for how this thing drives, and so far, I'm already having fun. I'm not gonna lie, again, this is the very first time I've ever driven around a track like this, so I am gonna do a really, really bad job, but the car itself seems to be handling pretty well. Again, obviously I'm not, but get full speed here on the back straight, and oh! All right, yeah, it's definitely gonna take some getting used to. I don't have a ton of experience with two-wheel drive either. See if I can get a clean lap here, though. There we go. I think I'm trying to go a little bit too fast. This is a pretty small oval. But yeah, she feels nice and smooth. Seems to be driving well. And yeah, I'm having fun. I can imagine having a bunch of cars like this out here and driving with them would be an absolute blast. So the track isn't exactly prepped for racing, so there's definitely some dust on it, but I'm really having a good time with this. And again, having a bunch of cars out here like this would be an incredible time. I might actually have to get out here and do some racing because this is more fun than I thought it would be. And I think that's kind of what this car is going to be for. This is for people who want to race, but don't want to go out and spend a bunch of money putting a custom kit together. They just want to buy a car, charge a battery, go out on the track, and have fun. And so far, in my very amateur opinion, it seems to be doing that very, very well. It turns left well, which is obviously what it's designed to do. And now that I've gotten a little bit more judicious with the throttle, it seems to be handling a lot better too. Staying out of the dust on the outside edges is definitely helping. And yes, this is a really, really fun little car. Well, that was a lot of fun. I think I need to spend a little bit more time on a racetrack. I can really see the appeal, but now let's turn this thing into basher mode. Now I get that not everybody's gonna wanna take this car and bash it, but this is an RTR and it's not the most expensive RTR in the world, so I get the feeling people that buy this to race will also probably wanna take it out and take it for a blast in the dirt. If you're gonna run it in the dirt, obviously you're not gonna wanna run it with these wings on, because if this thing flips over, these wings could get damaged and they're not really gonna do you any good when you're bashing. And I suspect for bashing, this thing's even gonna look better and it'll handle better without the wings on too. Speaking of which, as you can see, we've got a lot of detail underneath this front wing, so the car still looks really cool without it on there. And I think things are gonna get even cooler underneath the big wing. With that wing off, some of this crash structure doesn't actually stay in place anymore, but Losi actually thought of that too. In the accessory bag, they include this piece, shorter screws for here and here, and this really cool looking Lexan visor that they call a nameplate, so I guess the driver's name would go right here. Of course, we'll leave it blank for now. And just like that, she's converted to wingless mode, and honestly, I think it looks better without the wing on there. I'm really glad they gave us that option. Now, let's go see how this thing bashes. Now, I want to reiterate that I know that this is not what this car is designed to do, but you know we have to try it, and honestly, it seems reasonably competent. It's obviously not going to be fast, and these tires are not getting the best traction, but launching off that jump was actually pretty fun. And, you know, for a small two-wheel drive vehicle that really isn't designed to be bashed, this is doing pretty darn well. I can definitely imagine someone coming out in their backyard, having fun with this thing, kind of driving around like this, then putting the wings on and going racing the next day. That's the beauty of an RTR like this. It's going to be a bit more durable than something like a purpose-built race kit probably will be. And Losi clearly made this with the beginner in mind. That's why the body is designed to be so durable, and that's why the chassis is probably going to be pretty durable as well, which is why it's handling these little jumps with no problem whatsoever. Of course, when you have a race car, you want it to be pretty durable too, because you don't want to get into a little bit of a wreck and then lose the race because your race car doesn't drive anymore. Will it go off the big jump? Oh yeah, no problem. Let's do that again. That's actually pretty good. This thing's reasonably competent, and honestly, the left bias doesn't make that much difference when you're just bashing around nice and slow like this. And I think we probably have about as much power as this chassis can really handle, especially with these tires. By the way, guys, let me know if you want to see me put some big knobby tires and a bunch of power to this thing. Honestly, I don't think it's necessary, but if you want to see it, I'll do it in a future video for you. This thing definitely does seem to be quite durable. I did just pop a link off on that last jump I took, but it really didn't take too long to find it, and it popped right back on again. And for the most part, this thing handles really well. Obviously, like you can see, it is slow, it doesn't have great traction, but it's still a lot of fun. And if you really get on it, you can throw some rooster tails and really slide around in the dirt. And again, I'm having a good time, and that's really all this is about. And there we go, guys, the Losi 22s sprint car. Oh, let me get this out of the shot. By the way, if you enjoyed seeing me put that gas engine in a Creighton, make sure you get subscribed, because I've got a video coming really soon you're not going to want to miss. With that being said, this thing is an absolute blast. Obviously, because it's an RTR, it's built pretty stout, and it's going to be pretty heavy. This is probably not going to be the car for someone who's professionally racing sprint cars, but someone who's professionally racing sprint cars isn't going to be looking at this car anyway. This car is going to be be for two different people. The first one's going to be for someone who has never done sprint car racing before and just wants to get into it the easiest way possible. You buy this, you charge the battery, you go to the track, you're racing. The other one's going to be for people who really love full-size sprint cars. This is a fantastic reproduction of a full-size sprint car. It's got a ton of scale detail, and overall, it just looks really, really nice. And the good thing is, you can bash this. Obviously, if you take this off big jumps, you're gonna break stuff. I did pop a link off. I was able to find it and pop it back on. But if you do stupid things like that, you risk breaking more than just a link. I found when bashing, the left turn bias was noticeable, but not detrimental. It's still a ton of fun, and you're sliding around all over the place anyway, so it doesn't really matter. And I think based on what this is, it seems like it's a pretty good deal for the people that are gonna want it. That being said, I'm certainly no racer, so I'd love to hear your opinion down in the comments. Is this gonna be the thing that gets you into sprint car racing? Are you a huge full-size sprint car fan and you want this just to have it? Do you want to see me put some big knobby tires and a bunch of power to this? Let me know down in the comments, get subscribed, and then check out one of these videos.